to Happiness Through Architecture, a webinar on how we can design healthier spaces and how cutting-edge advances in neuroscience might better inform these happy places. So firstly, I'd like to welcome our 4 speakers: Associate Professor George Christopoulos in Singapore, Andrew de Parva in Sao Paulo, Dr. Tanya Tan in Hong Kong, and Frven Lim, who's in London. Each speaker is going to speak for approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and we will close with a question and answer session for about half an hour, which we open to the audience. So you're not going to be able to speak, but if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, and then we'll ask those at the end of the session. Okay, so I forgot about myself. I'm Kailas Moorthy. I'm a well-accredited architect leading DPArchitects Global Wellbeing Drive. And so that's well-being in terms of how we design, but also how we work. I'm a Londoner. I worked all around the world, but through those travels and those rich experiences, I've remained a Londoner at heart. And as I explained earlier, I'm back in dark, grey, cold, damp London. Before we start with our first speaker, I'm just going to give a brief overview of why we're here. And nowadays, we tend to spend all our time talking about the word COVID. So I'm going to start with COVID. COVID has shown us that mental resilience and mental health are super critical in order to maintain our overall health. And our environments, where we spend nearly 90% of our time, which is indoors, has a super important influence on our health. And being locked up in these spaces during COVID has had an impact on our health. So additionally, mental traumas can seriously impact our physical well-being. So it's super important. So if we can design our spaces to be more nurturing of our psychological well-being, to make us happy, we will be ultimately more productive and physically healthier. So neuroscience, or neurobiology, or brain science is the scientific study of the nervous system, which includes, to a large extent, the brain. By using this knowledge, we can better understand in an evidence-based, peer-reviewed ecosystem how space can make us feel. And ultimately, if we can synergize between brain experts, neuroscientists, and architects, we can design happier spaces. So that's in summary why we're here today and what we're trying to achieve. So now I'm going to pass on to our first speaker, who is Frven Lim. So Frven Lim is a well-accredited architect as well. He leads the DPArchitects London office and is an adjunct tutor at Harvard University and Singapore's NUS, which is a National University of Singapore. Before uprooting to London, Frven practiced architecture for many years in Singapore, where he was honoured with being one of the top 20 under 45 architects there. So he's no longer under 45. He's passionate about lifelong learning, the brain, using the brain's full potential, being or trying to be healthy, and of course, architecture. So I'm going to pass the parallel on to Frven now. Over to you. You're on mute, Frven.
Still mute. I can.
Still mute.
Okay, I'm on mute, and I will go through my get my slide on. You can see my slide, yeah. You can see my pic photo, yeah.
We can see your photo, yep.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, okay, but I'm going to speak. Thanks, Kailas. I'm going to speak Singapore style. So it's the kind of pace when you play back the video, you got to, instead of scrubbing up, you got to scrub down. Yeah, you know, when you watch a webinar, you can bring it to like 1.25 speed, 1.5 speed, so that you can go faster. But this one, you might have to go slower because I will speak really, really fast, like in Singapore style. So I want to, because I've got so much I want to say, I'm really, really controlling myself. Most of the time, my teammates have to put me on mute just to get me to stop. Now, happiness through architecture. I'm very passionate about this, partly, not partly, actually, mainly because I myself went through a very rough patch, and I really think that as an architect, having been trained and blessed to have the skills, there is really something that architects have to do. I don't even see it as something that we can do. I see it as something that we have to do, meaning if we don't do, it's kind of wrong. Yeah, it's our responsibility to. So in the very brief 12 minutes or so, I'm going to speed through 3 questions, 3 topics, and in a way, I'm hoping to kind of set a kind of premise and a backdrop for our very knowledgeable 3 speakers. I'm doing the introduction. Yeah. Okay. So what is happiness? Why the need to deal with it? Why architecture has a role to play? What is happiness? So if you, I think you can see the books behind me. So I've been trying to investigate and really look at like things at large, very broadly. So if you ask any parent and you say, I can only grant you 1 wish for your child, you know, what would that be? And after considering, they will always say, I just want them to be happy. You know, I mean, if you give them a few wishes, they'll say, I want them to be wealthy, I want them to be the president and all that. But you say 1, I just want them to be happy. So what's so magical about being happy? Intrinsically, as a human being, our brain and our whole being is to search for happiness. But I will explain what is my definition of happiness. So if we work in a corporate world, we work in a club or society organization, we are familiar with AGM, it's the annual general meeting, right? But once in a while, when something is very, very important, we have to call an extraordinary general meeting. We cannot wait for the AGM. So the EGM is actually, to me, or I mean, I'm a Singaporean, so I have to use these kind of alphabets and all that, you know, to kind of associate to things, right? That's what happens if you're in Singapore. So EGM, experiences, growth, and meaning. So that is my way of encapsulating or defining happiness. There are many, many ways. This is my way, the way that I think can work. Experiences. So if you look at the pictures, you know, you could have a really, really handsome boy sitting on the swing from olden days. Very, very handsome boy. I mean, he will become a really, really handsome man when he grow up. And you know, you can go on holidays and you can do all sorts of things, win trophies. You can when I bought the current iPad, I waited for 3 weeks, like no, 2 months. And when you get it, you are so excited, you're so happy, right? Or when you finally get the reward, like a promotion, and you go on an amazing holiday. But those are experiences. Experiences is one kind of happiness. And that's very important because the nice dinner you have with your partner, you know, treasuring those moments. But the thing that we have to realize is these are experiences and they last for a certain period of time. Yes. I mean, 2 weeks after I got the latest iPad, it's not so exciting anymore. I'm still happy with it, but you lose that kind of, you know, the kick. So let's go. Whoops. Then you have this growth. Growth is when we growth and learning. So it's when we learn new tricks and learn new things, right? So if you remember, when you see a little child, could be yours, could be your nephew, someone else that you know, and they're taking the first steps. It's so fascinating. They are like so excited, like I finally made it. Or when they learn to paint, they went to stack up the blocks. But the problem is growth and learning became very challenging for us because of the modern society education system. It became a channel and something we have to do well, to get that good job, to get paid, to get promotion so that you can afford the holiday and all that. But intrinsically in our brain, when we learn and when we grow, acquire new skills, think of the cavemen when they learned how to create a fire. Like, woohoo, you know, there's something more that I could do now, yeah? So that's something to remember. We'll expand on it later. I can't go in depth because I have to lead up to my 3 questions, right? Meaning. So meaning and purpose. So if you look at, you know, that slightly younger version of me, and I had my second, that was my second daughter. And I was going to use another photograph, but it might be slightly distasteful, but I'll describe to you. When a parent is trying to clean the nappy, you've got like all kinds of quite literally shit, right? In your face, in your hands. By definition, that should not be a happy moment. But you can tell that the parent is like really immersed in pure joy, right? So there's something else that makes us happy as human beings, yeah? And also, if you spend time with elderly people, you know, if you're an elderly couple next door, they haven't got children, no grandchildren, you spend like 20 minutes having a biscuit with them on a Saturday, it brings so much joy to them, right? Because they're really lonely. Spending time with your family. So these are not experiential. It's because it's got a deeper meaning and purpose. When you serve society, when you help others, it brings you joy. And it's not a zero-sum thing, meaning that you make someone happy, you are happy too. They don't take that smile or the happiness away from you. You grow in the happiness, okay? So on that construct, I'm going to jump to my next question. Why do I need to deal with it? So fundamentally, okay, now we have to go to the more like kind of methodical mathematician mind, okay? Everyone knows the X and Y curve. So if we are to put the X and Y as wealth and health, I actually had an animation, but I figured that it wouldn't work. So I'm doing the still frames. Imagine, so if I would ask you, what do you want to be? Most people would say, I want to be B, maximum wealth, maximum health. Yes? I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's quite obvious. Yeah. And you don't want to be D, like weakest wealth, weakest health. That would be miserable, right? But actually, to me, I feel that there is an X, Y, and a Z dimension, which is happiness, because of the fact that we cannot define our everyday based on wealth and health only. There is a big supercomputer that we have between our ears that deals with this. And if I were to extrapolate, so you have to visualize like a 3D graph, right? So you get this point on your screen, which is very, very good wealth, low health, low happiness. There are such people, yeah. There are millionaires who are in this situation. They can buy everything, but they've literally screwed up their body, and they don't have a family to spend that time with them, but they can buy everything. Or you could have the wealth and you can have the health, but you could be sitting on a rocking chair, very fit, because you could pay for the best surgeons and all the vitamins and everything you need, but you've got no one to spend that time with you, yeah? So the ideal model that you will want to aspire to, I mean, is a kind of like, wow, wouldn't it be great if I have the wealth, I have the health and the happiness? But as we know, I've come across very few people who are in that situation. There are, but not every one of us is easy for us to get there. So let me describe a little bit about what's the difference between AA and BB. So when we are at AA, it is when we are adequately and quite happy. We've got good health, and that is within our control. But maybe we're not there for the wealth part, but we want to be BB because it is not that money is bad, but to chase for only money is a false illusion, right? So we can, the model that I think is nice, or at least for myself, to go for is to be happy, to be healthy. I have basic adequate wealth. I can always have more wealth, but I will never compromise happiness and health for that wealth. Yeah. So health is wealth. We learn from COVID, we learn from pandemic, because all of a sudden you could be the wealthiest, but you can still die. Yeah. And so the key difference between these three things, I would say, is that wealth, at times you can be within your control, but a lot of times there is many other components at play. But the one thing that we can each do something today is our own health and our own happiness is within our own control. Yes. But as an architect, it's like, okay, I mean, this is like kind of, so what does architecture do with it, right? And if we were to read widely, we realize that also when you're happy, you will be successful. Most people are thinking, like I was, when we are successful, when we have the $1 million, we can be happy. But it doesn't work like that. It's been proven that it doesn't work like that. So there are loads and loads of people who are real experts in different very specific streams. So let's say Sean Accord. So if you chase for, you know, the attention to try and just repair your broken elbow, then all you get is a repaired elbow. But we can actually make us stronger. That means we can make ourselves happy. We do not have to make ourselves not unhappy. We can actually make ourselves happy. being happy is different from being not unhappy, right? I mean, there could be a long conversation about that. So let me come to my third point. So I hope I haven't lost you there. So then as an architect, it's like, okay, fine, I know you want to be happy, but what the hell has architecture got to do with it? Let me explain. So 90% of our awake lives, meaning other than when you're in your bed, is indoors, yeah? So there could be 10% outdoors, but 90% indoors. You could be at home, that's indoors. You could be in the office. You could be wherever. It could be in the restaurant. Yeah, but the office and the workplace is so such a major part of that 90% indoors, right? And those spaces, I mean, when I say we, I mean, the fraternity, designers, urban planners, architects have a role to play, and we have that responsibility to make it better, right? So at the moment, statistically, under the World Health, about 5% of all grown-ups are suffering from clinical depression. That means they are taking medication, and they are at that stage. But there's a lot more that is pre that stage, or maybe not even telling anyone, right? And then the next thing is inactivity, right? We sit for 10 hours on the chair, working on a computer, trying to evolve our neck into a new shape, trying to make our body become like that in 50,000 years time. I mean, that's what we're putting ourselves through. And inactivity is leading to obesity, diabetes, heart attack, dementia. But mental and physical is interconnected. Okay, it's intertwined. The brain controls the body, and whether the body is healthy or not feeds back to the brain. We are an amazing human being. I mean, no machine can compete with us, right? So architecture. So architecture has amazing things that we can do. So by studying and trying to take the WELL exam, I also learned a lot of other things that I was more ignorant about earlier on. So this is a cheat. Yeah, this is actually my own video to help myself to learn to pass the exam. Okay, so these are the different attributes of the WELL exam. But what's interesting also is architecture, other than making people well, primarily is about the mixture of the mental and the physical. When you can calibrate and do that well, pardon the pun, we can be happy. So we have to read widely. Architecture today, urban design, spatial design today, just like many things, cannot be about reading architecture books. So I'm not, there's nothing wrong with enjoying my small, medium, large, XL, the OMA Ram Kuas book that I have for a long time. There's nothing wrong. But in order to progress, we got to go so much wider because the world is so much more complex today. And by understanding neuroscience, by understanding this thing that we have, I don't know whether you heard the music, but it's very loud for me. But by understanding this fascinating thing, it's not real, just in case you think that someone was harmed for this presentation. It's not real, okay? So by understanding the brain and understanding how architecture can relate to the sensations and what's happening in the brain, we can do something, okay? As it happens, we have already been, do you hear the music, by the way, Kailas? You don't, right? Oh, so then it's fine, because the music, like... So by understanding architecture today, we can merge and create spaces and plan and fight for policies to create architecture that is mixed program, okay? Architecture that encourages people to move and fight inactivity. And when people move, we can create architecture to let people meet each other. And the 1 or 2 days you come into the office is when you don't want to be sitting or even standing at the desk, like punching the internet. It's to meet people and to talk, right? And that improves our mental, improves our physical well-being. And I'm not saying that that's the only solution. I'm just drawing one example. The old-fashioned vertical circulation of a stairs, when done correctly, it is no longer just a vertical circulation kind of device. It becomes a space. It becomes something that we can use, right? Similarly, if you have a pantry or a cafe where people cook together, they eat healthy. Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that. So this is where I spend a lot of time walking, just chilling out. But on another occasion, I can talk a little bit more about what's so fascinating about that. It's got strong connections to biophilia because that is where we come from. For between 45,000 up to 100, slightly about 100,000 years until now, we've been cavemen. I mean, I'm using the generic word caveman, yeah? And it's only been the last 200 years or so that we live in concrete jungle, steel and glass, you know? It's not like a long time. So we enjoy biophilia and we enjoy nature. Then there are a lot of things that is built into our hardwired in our brain that if we understand through neuroscience, through anthropology, through psychology, we architects become better designers and we can really change the world. Right? We change the world. So now the question is, do you take the green pill, the blue pill, or the red pill? Only the slightly older people would know the matrix, unfortunately, but I think there's a matrix 4 coming. But do you take the blue pill or the red pill, right? What do you do as an architect? And if you want to know more about what I do, you hold up the phone, you click this, it will bring you to my Linktree links, and then you can see, you know, which has got options to go to my LinkedIn and all that, which I'm like crazy. I'm like you can't stop me. I'm like talking so much because I really think we have to do something and we should, and it would be wrong not to. So I'm sure I've used up more than the time that I've been allocated, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frven. I would take the red pill now. It's not, the answer's not important. So on to, that was really enlightening, actually, a really good presentation. So on to our next speaker, Andrea de Parva. So she's also an architect and urban planner. She's the founder of NeuroAU, an online space that aims to discuss and disseminate knowledge about the links between cognitive science and architecture. She's a member of the Center for Education of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture at the Salk Institute in California. And the list goes on and on. So I'm going to stop there and just pass it on to Andrea, who will tell you the good stuff. So over to you, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kailas. Let me just start sharing my screen. Okay, so I think you can all see my screen now.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Okay, so I won't waste my time talking about myself. I think that was enough. But let me just talk a little bit about what I wrote here, which is the topic I want to discuss with you today. And I don't know if you paid attention, but in the end of the title, I write happiness today and tomorrow. So I want us to think about happiness and also about architecture and buildings and cities as a long-term investment. We need to think them on the long term and not only on the short-term effects that they can have on us. So an example that thinking about happiness on the short term might lead to, I don't know, problems to achieving happiness in the future, or might lead to a decrease in our chances to achieve happiness in the future. We can make a parallel with what we eat or how much we spend. So eating chocolate once now or once in a while will make me happy now. But if I eat chocolate like every time, every day in the future, I might have some health issues and I might even not be able to eat chocolate anymore. So my chances of being happy in the future might decrease. The same goes with money. If I spend all my money today and so on. And with architecture, I want us to think in a similar way, because the physical environment can also affect us differently on the short term and on the long term. And I think a good example would be what is happening with our homes right now, because before the pandemic, our home was the place to go, I don't know, as a refuge to rest and relax. But now that we are spending like almost all the time at our homes, the effects it's generating or they are generating on our bodies and brain is completely different. So when we think about short-term occupation spaces and long-term occupation spaces, this might also change our strategy to design those spaces. And bridging all this that I'm talking about with neuroscience, there are many studies showing that architecture or the physical environment, any kind of physical environment, can affect brain both on the short term and on the long term. So brain function can be affected. So I don't know, more blood flow can go to my brain. I can improve my cognition or my creativity on the short term. Be also influenced because of architecture, not only, but also because of the environment where I am. And it's not only that. Environments where I spend a long time or longer time might in the future affect my brain structure. So we call that brain plasticity. We can either through our spaces help the brain increase its size, its thickness, or on the other hand, if we are creating spaces that are not stimulating, on the long term, we can lead to decrease of brain size, or specific areas in the brain can decrease their size. And also we can lose connections between our neurons or weaken them. So the environment can do both. It can help us improve our brains, or it can impair our brain even physically. And I gave the example of chocolate before because I would like us to think here in some way that the same way that we have dietary needs, we have also spatial needs. So it's not needs for the space to be functional. So if I'm going to, I don't know, design a school, I need to have classrooms and I need to have desks for the students, a space for the teachers. That we already know. But what I want us to discuss are our primitive needs that we have also in relation to the environment. So I don't have only needs, I need to eat or to drink water, or I don't know, to balance my diet. I also need to balance my environments. And there are three needs that I'm going to talk about here. There are more of them, but of course, here I made a selection. So the first one is movement. So Frven already mentioned how inactivity can lead to several diseases and how important it is to move our bodies and how design can affect that. I will talk a little bit on this topic as well. I will talk about relaxation. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it's not that we need to be all the time relaxed, because the stress is important for us, for our performance throughout the day, but we need to control chronic stress levels. We are stressed like all the time. It's not just an acute stress, very punctual. It's something that we are having to deal with all the time, and this is not healthy for us. So this is something we are going to talk about, and we will see how architecture can also influence that. And I'm not going to talk about natural light because I know George will bring this topic later. So talking about movement, and Frven also mentioned that we evolved in nature. So we have like a very strong response to biophilic design, but also most of our history we spend as nomadics. So like our cities are very recent, they date around 6,000 years ago, and our first permanent residences began to appear only 12,000 years ago. So we can see that like throughout the million years of evolution, we were walking through spaces. So we were moving our bodies, our brain evolved while we were moving our bodies. And there are many positive effects that short-term effects, later I will talk about long-term effects, but short-term effects that the physical exercise or activity can lead. So more blood flow to the brain, which means that we will think better. Here I even have the title of a famous study saying that we become more creative after walking. So we will think better, our cognition will improve, our creativity levels will improve if we move our bodies, because more blood is going to the brain. Also, our mood will improve because we will boost the production of serotonin and dopamine, which are very important for us to feel pleasure, to feel happiness, to feel that we are well. So So there is also this positive effect. And another interesting effect to consider is that physical exercise or movement to our body on the short term can help us decrease anxiety levels. But talking about effects on the long term, we have a positive effect on brain plasticity. So as I said before, we can make our brain produce more neurons or improve the connections between neurons, also because of how much we are moving our bodies. And we can even, as you can see here in this study, delay Alzheimer's disease. So through exercise, we can boost the resilience of our brain. And also, this is one of the best ways to deal with chronic stress, which I already mentioned is like a huge problem that we have to deal right now. But if we think about the life we're living now with the pandemic or after the pandemic, we can see that there was a huge impact on how we move. Before the pandemic, inactivity was already a problem, like a world problem. It's not a one country, like everywhere we are less active than we should. If we were even before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, we can see here, this is a research from last year, showing how much steps we decreased in comparing 19 to 20. So the year before the pandemic, we used to walk much more here, like in Brazil, where I am. We are walking, or we decreased walking by 15%. So you can see, like, even in other countries that the numbers are very significant. So we were not walking as we used to before. And before it was already not enough. So now it's even more critical to talk about that. And of course, design can help. So let's make the bridge between all I said with design. We can see that here I have 2 studies with stairs showing that just because they were like designed differently, so with colors or the piano stairs that which make also sound when you step on it, there was an increase of around 63% or 66% in each case of people choosing to use the traditional stairs instead of lifts or some other alternatives which you wouldn't move your body. So design of stairs is also something that can help us change behaviors, change decision-making, and change habits into healthier habits. And as Frven showed already, if we rethink the importance of our circulation systems, we can create active design, which is a design that will support movement. And this works for the building, and this also works for the city. We can rethink our streets to be more interesting for people to walk or to take a bicycle. So we can think on both kinds of spaces. But if we rethink the position of our elevators and the position of stairs and the appearance of stairs, like with more colors, more light, larger stairs, and if they are better integrated to the general circulation system, we can make people choose to use the stairs, even if they are not even aware that we did that on purpose. So this is an important point. We can generate change without people being aware that of our intentions. Also, furniture can affect our body and can be designed to improve movement and change of body posture. So as we can see here with this kind of desk that you can control how it goes. So natural light, as I said, I won't talk about it because George will talk about it later. And let's talk a little bit about relaxation before we finish. So as I said, the problem here is not any kind of stress. Stress is important at some points in our lives, but the problem is chronic stress, which is known to damage the brain. So here you can see some studies, and there are like many more showing how they can also affect brain plasticity, but on a negative way. And again, if we think about our lives after the pandemic or during the pandemic, comparing with what it was before, we can see that we are more stressed, we are more anxious. In like every country, there was a huge difference. So if it was important to talk about that and to think architecture as a way to help to deal with chronic stress levels before the pandemic, now this is even more important. And of course, we can go on both ways. So architecture or the physical environment and spatial attributes can lead to increase chronic stress because of noise pollution. So a bad acoustics can lead to that, because people might be feeling caged depending on the size of windows and on how much time they are going to spend on a space, if there are opportunities to meet other people or not, if there are multisensory stimuli or not. So feeling caged is also something very important, which can lead to chronic stress levels increase. And also density, lack of refuge is also known to lead to that. There are other spatial attributes, but again, I'm here just making a selection so we can have time to talk about it. And again, design can help us to improve or to create spaces that will help people to deal with chronic stress levels or to control chronic stress levels. So design can increase relaxation. Frven mentioned the benefits of being in contact with nature, and there are so many studies showing like every detail of it. So the benefit of touching wood, of smelling forest smell, or of listening to birds, or listening to the water or the sea, or seeing nature, even if it's just an image. So if we can incorporate more nature to our cities and buildings, we are also helping people deal with chronic stress levels, because all those studies, they show that smelling, touching, seeing, all this leads to more relaxation. So there is a restorative benefit when we are in contact with nature. Here we can see that even if it's fake nature, we can also achieve positive results. So in hospital design, just creating a fake sky view can lead to 34% difference in anxiety and 53% difference in acute stress. And of course, we can incorporate that in very different ways to our design solutions. So there are more radical and intense immersive ways, like at the Singapore airport, which is amazing. But there are cheaper solutions or easier solutions that we can also think of, and which are also positive to control stress levels. And not only we can apply biophilic design inside our buildings, but we can also create more opportunities to take people outdoors. We spend a lot of time, more than 90% of our time indoors. So we need to create spaces that invite people outside. Another way to deal with stress through design is bringing more fractals. So we can create a fractal architecture, and fractals are also known to help us control our stress levels. So there are several studies again showing that just by looking to fractal images, our body and brain will present such responses. Active design, as I mentioned previously, is also another alternative, because exercise is like the best tool that we have to fight stress. So again, if we rethink our circulation systems to make stairs more interesting for people, we can influence how much they are going to use the stairs, even if they are not aware of that influence. Spaces of refuge are also important. before our home was a refuge for us, but now our home is the place where we are having everything. And many times we live with like a huge family, so we don't even have a refuge from them in our homes. So we need to think as the office or retail spaces as refuges as well, and the same goes for city spaces, public spaces. So we need to, in all kinds of architecture or urbanism designs we think of, we need to consider creating solutions for people to, I don't know, to escape from high density and from noise, for instance, and exposition. And finally, just to start concluding here, one very important thing as well that we need to consider is to offer multiple possibilities so people can choose. The feeling of choice is also known to decrease stress levels. If we don't feel agency, if we don't feel autonomy, our stress levels will increase. So if we create diversity in our designs, we are offering different opportunities, different possibilities, and people can choose like each one of them that will be better for, I don't know, each people. And so what's next? I would like just to read this quote by Richard Neutra. He says that the fact that a man does not realize the harmfulness of a product or a design element in his surroundings does not mean that it is harmless. So sometimes we don't recognize that space in some way, the physical environment where we are, can be affecting us negatively. We might not be consciously aware of that, but as designers, as architects, we need to know such effects so we can create better spaces that will support happiness both on the short term and on the long term. And a very important point to make here is that we are changing the way we use spaces. So we are not using our homes or our cities or our workplaces as we used before. So this also requires changes in how we design such spaces. We need spaces that help us to fulfill human primitive needs. But if we are walking less, if we are not going that much outside, so having the chance to, I don't know, see the sun and have some sunlight in our skin or to see nature, we need to think of solutions to bring these elements to where people are spending more time. So we need to design functional environments in the short term, but we also need to meet such primitive needs, as I mentioned, and contribute to maintenance of well-being and happiness in the long term. Of course, evidence-based design can help us achieve that. So base our design solutions in everything we used to base before, but also consider basing them on scientific evidence. So this is why I was bringing so many studies to present to you. And this is why neuroscience is so important to be incorporated in our design solutions. So to close my talk, I think another way, very important way for us to design better spaces is when we have interdisciplinary collaborations. So this is why I think this webinar with architects, neuroscientists together is something very interesting, very important, and we need more of that. So I think that's it. Here you have the QR code for my website if you want to see something else on this topic, but I will stop sharing my screen. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. That was a really enlightening presentation. The thing that stuck into my mind was the chocolate, but anyway, we won't go there. Thanks for that. We're going to discuss that a lot further later on. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Tanya Tan, and she's currently Assistant Professor in the Department of Building and Real Estate at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. She received a PhD in architecture from the Chinese University Hong Kong, and she studied and worked in many different countries, including Singapore and France. She's passionate about sustainable urban design and designing for well-being. So over to you, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me first share my screen. Can you see the screen now? You can see the screen now? Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for Frven and Andrea for the interesting talks. So followed by them, I will going to also today talk a little bit about design, perception, and well-being. So in fact, I really liked the theme of this event. So just to repeat here, to find evidence of how architecture and architects are fundamental parts of shaping our world. In fact, so today I'm trying to bring some pieces of evidence to show that, in fact, design really matters. It matters a lot. So first of all, the first piece of evidence came from Singapore, in the workplace that we be in every day, maybe not in the past year, but probably very soon. So I don't know whether we realize, but the truth is we spend a lot of time at work and in our office and workspaces. So it definitely plays an important role shaping our mood, affecting our productivity and also our health. But in fact, there are not much information or data come from field investigations. Very little we discuss about the design interventions. Probably today. So the story I'm going to tell about actually started back in 2016, when after I graduated and got my degree, I joined NTU in Singapore in a project studying work environment and how it affects your health. Is there any, from a psychological perspective, can improve by design? So I met and worked with a lot of people from different fields, including neuroscientists, engineers, and as well as social scientists and health people. So I learned a lot from them, from different, for example, different research methods. So I can actually see and approach the issue in architecture from a different perspective. So, but being a designer, so when you talked about to study workplaces, the first initial is I want to go to the site and then to see exactly how do they look like. And during my site visit, I can feel that all the offices are quite decently designed. Well, there was something a little bit off in terms of like the so-called secondary function rooms, such as like corridors, circulation areas, etc. So then I tried to actually trigger me to actually frame my research question in the project. So the first one is like everyone in the project trying to see, does the design of workspaces affect mood and health? And then from my perspective, inspired by all this site visit, is like, I want to see, does the design of some of the transitional areas would affect your perception of the office? If yes, then what are the key design aspects? And would any individual difference or individual factor play a role in this? So we did some investigations. For example, we measured the environmental quality following the protocol pattern, for example, measuring the temperature, air quality, as well as like the lighting, like lux level, etc. And then we also invite about 20 office workers in Singapore to join our study to like ask them about their perception about their office and some of the transitional areas. And we conduct like health survey and like work fatigue survey, and also some individual differences questionnaires related to like space perception. And then with that, we conduct some statistical analysis. So the results looks like this. We do like linear mixed model and the moderation statistical analysis. But let's look at the result in plain human language. So exactly, what we found is like, for example, the design of an office matters, which is like just like the previous study that we showed that it will affect your fatigue from work and physical and mental health. So for example, a crowded personal space would lower your physical health scores. So air quality matters a lot and you will affect your work fatigue, for example. This we probably already know a little bit and we confirm that. But something new interestingly is like, because according to Professor Peter Triganza, we talked about a lot like the lux level, like brightness on your desk level, like your desktop level. But then actually some part is like being ignored is the frontal area brightness, like 20° upper and 20° lower in front of you. And this part area is actually also matters. And our study confirmed that the brightness from the frontal area also affect your mental health. And how happy you are with the surface color in your office also help to reduce like mental work fatigue. For designers, we always know that lighting design and surface color design, usually we team them up and then you shouldn't discuss like one without another, right? They play the trick together. So, but what's new from our study, and that's what I also want to see, is the effect of like the design of transitional areas, like the corridor leading to your office. So we found out actually if a very confined corridor would actually lead to actually for you to feel like you have a heavier workload and also maybe more physically tired if you feel like your corridor is actually a confined space. And also a confined and dim corridor will also affect the mental health of the workforce in workplaces. So, and another interesting thing is that we find out if a more profound perceived difference between the corridor leading to your office and your office will actually affect your perception on your office. It's actually in a more negative way. So because in design theory, it's a design method as well that in some location, we're trying to use a contract between spaces to emphasize, for example, one of the main function room, for example, in theater. But in the context of office building, maybe a more transit, like a fluent transit would give it to a positive result. So that's something interesting to notice. Another thing is if you perceived your corridor a confined space, probably more likely you will feel that your office is also quite confined. So this is particularly true for people with claustrophobia, which in fact 1 in 10 of us are suffering from different different levels of claustrophobia. So that actually matters. So since now we actually see that the transitional area would play a role, so which are the areas that we should pay attention? So we identify probably the dimension in terms of length, as well as the thermal environment and the lighting in the transitional areas will actually affect in different ways. So so basically for this study, the message we try to communicate with designers are basically not only put the effort to office itself, but actually for example, the corridors connected to your office also matters, because we all know that space are experienced by sequence. And we actually provide evidence that your immediate experience, for example, passing through the corridor before you entering the office, will affect your experience in the office as well. So this is something interesting to know. And I also want to use a little bit of time left to talk about some of the current work of the team. This is also some evidence bringing from Hong Kong, from the urban spaces, move a little bit to the outdoor urban spaces in design perception and well-being. So in fact, probably many of you would know, Hong Kong is actually just like Singapore, is a high density, hot, humid place. And we did a study in the to try to see how in different urban setting would affect people's outdoor thermal comfort in the hot, humid summer in Hong Kong. So we did survey with 2,000 people here, and then also measurement in different urban environment, for example, very high density, noisy urban spaces, or some kind of dense built residential area, but with green spaces, and in urban park, for example. So we're just trying to see what are the environmental factors that would contribute your thermal perception. In fact, just like Andrea actually mentioned, we found that different sense actually would join together to affect your thermal sensation. But another point that we're trying to see, which is quite interesting here, is how happy you are with the design of the space in terms of like the aesthetic quality of the urban design would actually matters. So for example, given the same microclimate condition, like the same temperature, when people are more happy with the design of the space, they show actually higher tolerance to heat in the summer. Actually, they would find actually a higher positive rating in terms of thermal sensation and comfort. So this actually is quite significant. As why? Because if you pay attention in the newly released IPCC report on climate change, basically climate change is inevitable. Scientists would now call. But if we can design our city in certain way, that we can actually help to improve the climate resilience or tolerance about health of our residents. So but then this is one piece of evidence that we show that design matters. But how do we actually shape our and design our urban spaces? So this is an ongoing study. We're trying to actually also see how would urban spaces been experienced, you know, in also in sequence, just like the office study, because many existing study, they study the environment or urban space in a stationary status, like people are actually standing or sitting. But in fact, most of the cases we walked in our city and we experience our city in walking. So walking comfort is interesting. We try to ask an older group of people and younger group of people to walk in the city in different urban settings, like in the sun, in the shade provided by building, and in the shade provided by green space and trees. We are actually, we also calculate different microclimate variables and also like our vital parameters. So we know so far we have an initial finding. For example, people generally walk slower in green spaces, and green spaces usually have it has the capacity to help people to restore their thermal comfort after they walk in the sun. But basically, shading by building, they cannot achieve that. They can make you cooler, but not necessarily back to comfort. As well as like green spaces or better designed urban spaces would actually help you to delay the time in terms of tree discomfort and also the magnitude of discomfort. It will help. Okay, so with the understanding, next part, we're going to conduct, for example, microclimate simulation, some spatial analysis in GStat to diagnose what are the existing problems, like what we are in the environment and what are the planning suggestions, etc. So I hope that we will have more to share with you soon with this study. But of course, I still have a lot to learn from all of you guys with different methods to see approach the problem. So that's all for now for today, and thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah.
That's proved many of the things I've designed in the past wrong. So thanks for that. And actually, it'll be good to discuss those when we have the Q&A later, because some of the facts and findings are really interesting. Thank you. So,
thank you.
On to our last and final speaker, Associate Professor George Christopoulos. So he's a cognitive neuroscientist who is co-director of Cultural Science Innovations and a member of the Advisory Council of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, ANFA, a collaborator at the University of Pennsylvania Center for Neuroaesthetics, and holds a PhD in decision neuroscience from the University of Cambridge. He examines how the human brain perceives and interacts with urban spaces to make decisions, a discipline called urban neuroscience. George believes that the design of spaces and places can significantly improve our health, well-being and performance, all at relatively low cost. His lab aims to understand the effect of architectural characteristics on human brain and body responses associated with cognitive health. Blimey, I didn't really understand any of that, but hopefully George will illuminate us and explain further how this all works and how we can change the world. So over to you, George. You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an architect, and I'm not so. I don't consider myself a pure neuroscientist. So somebody interested how we can solve problems using science. So anyway, going share my screen. Okay, can you see?
Not yet. Maybe you're sharing the. Okay, it's coming up.
No?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
we
You can see
that.
it.
All right, because it's Friday night, and I'll try to be quick and maybe skip some slides because many things have been already presented. All right, so as far as we understand, we need to design with the brain in mind. The question is how. So I'm trying to help with my expertise. The young, promising architects that want to make better designs, like this person, like a very young, promising architect. So what I'm gonna present is some neuroscience principles for architecting. I made it. So Frem has this problem. They usually work mostly on this space, which is objective. It's lines, right, and something we measure. And let's say that Frem wants to put these two orange balloons at this point. Now, these two orange balloons, the question is, how are they perceived by the brain? Neuroscience exactly examines how the brain represents reality. This is what we examine. So these two dots are the same, all right? But now they are not. Now, you know they are the same, but something deep in your brain, you cannot accept that they are the same, all right? We talked about matrix before. Exactly, that's it. The matrix is in your mind. No matter what you can do, no matter how much I have you measure these orange dots, the brain cannot accept reality. This is something that architects know for a long time, but they are trying to solve. The problem is, this is the main problem for architects, that they work on this space, but actually this space is distorted. The question is, how can we connect these two spaces? So I will give some principles now. And the first one is the principle of non-reality. You are being taught to use AutoCAD and BIM, all right, but at some point, and I think more experienced architects know that, you should forget about them. A straight line is not a straight line, and the best demonstration of this comes, of course, early on. If a Greek is speaking, you cannot avoid the reference to Greece, all right? So to this building, Parthenon, it looks perfect. It looks lines because it has a lot of lines, but it has a secret. In fact, there are no straight lines. There are no right angles. All the columns are unequal. Nothing is as you will design it in BIM. Okay. So that's how actually the temple looks like, and why they do that. Of course, it's an illusion, right? That's how it looks. So that's how it is, but that's how it looks. Again, is what matters is how reality is represented, and this is the major problem that architects are trying to solve. Now, another image that has another secret here. Very beautiful image, but it's not about biophilia. It's not about biophilia. Probably you're wondering what is there. The secret here is here. These two organisms co-evolved to fit each other. Okay. The same happens between the occupants of a space and the space, the occupants of a city and the city. They both co-evolve to fit each other. This is something we need to understand. And another thing I want to bring is a principle of time. Things change, and we need to see how they change. So things co-evolve. As we saw before, the cities change humans, right? They can make us walk more or less. They can make us sleep more or less. They have noise or less noise. And they have a design. But humans also change the cities. So when I saw this picture in Singapore, people say, oh, okay, this is not going to happen in Singapore. Well, okay, challenge accepted. There you are, a picture I took some time ago, even in Singapore. So even in Singapore, we are changing the city. So we have our architect, and the architect needs to realize that he's not an architect of what? I think architects are actually choice architects. They are defining the space in which we are making the decisions. And a very obvious example is here. Which car do you think will most likely turn right? We are not forbidding any decision, right? The car can choose, but it has more probability that it will turn right if it's based on the design. If you don't believe me that this happens, just go to the fair price next time and see how it is designed. Round edges. This is something my students discovered. The pricey part has these tiles. The less pricey part has these tiles. Not random. So as architects, you are trying to determine the choices. The choices and behavior happens continuously. So we need to go to the shorter time point or time frame we can understand. We should understand that small and continuous and omnipresent stimuli can affect biology and cognition. Things that happen again and again and again and again have a lot of significance. So I'll give some evidence of that, all right? So let's talk about stress, which is estimated to be 3.2 billion annually in Singapore. So we did this study. In our study, 83% of workers reported stress at work, not surprising for Singapore. But what is more interesting is we measured the perception of air, thermal comfort, noise, and light. And to understand this graph, if it's below the line of 1, it means that it improves, all right? So the idea is that if you improve all these aspects, stress, your perceived stress at work is reduced. Just by improving the environment, all right? It's quite amazing to me as a psychologist. There's something called the sick building syndrome. So some buildings they're not sick themselves, but they are causing people to be sick. Okay. Also, some very costly. And again, we found that if we improve air quality and thermal comfort, you can decrease the sick building syndrome. And that means people they're not absent from work. Let's go back to stress. Again, research shows that, strangely, it's not a major event, for instance, a divorce or somebody dying, that will make you stressed. It might make you depressed, but not stressed. What makes you stressed is the everyday micro stressor, all right? The everyday noise, everyday fighting, etc. So the idea is, can architecture somehow help on that? We try to see if you even take a very quick break, will it help? And we make it even more challenging. If you take a quick break that is extra 200 seconds, all right, with traffic noise. So we make participants very tired somehow, okay? And then we ask them to take a break with traffic noise, with different duration. And then we measure something called the heart rate variability, which is something very important because it connects our body with our brain. And you can somehow check whether somebody has recovered. To put it very roughly, is the fatter and shorter the cycle is, it means that you have somehow recovered. So indeed, after 100 of break with traffic noise, there is not much recovery. They're still tired. But if we leave them another 200 seconds just to relax, even with traffic noise, there is some recovery. So this is also quite amazing. Within 200 seconds, and I'm not talking going to nature, etc. Just relax. You can recover. So it means that momentary, quick responses, small stressor matter a lot. So how can we reduce them? We already talked about even taking a very short break. So how do we study this in neuroscience? We might show an image of a snake, and then we measure some physiological response, and then naturally, if I flash a snake to you, you would make a stress response. This is something not very surprising. What is surprising is that if I put an image that is nothing, followed by the same image, and in between, I throw the image of a snake for 50 milliseconds. This means that you never saw it. This means that if I ask you, did you see a snake? You say no. You will still get this stress response. That means that all the time there are things happening in the background that might cause stress, but we do not know. And that's the point of architecture, is that there are things in the background that matter. And that's what this research shows. All right, but we did another study. We said, okay, we saw the snake. Obviously, there is a snake, all right? It's not hidden. And we throw in between another image that is meaningless. Let's say the iPhone, it didn't have an effect. The question is, can we put something that is subliminal, that is in the background, that could help reduce the stress without you knowing? So what could make us feel safe, secure, right? Somebody talked before about memories, right? Memories are an important emotional mechanism, talking about nostalgia. And what is the first memory that makes us safe, right? Is our mother, right? Or any caregiver, maternal figure. Indeed, we know that if we saw a maternal figure, it can reduce the stress. Okay, so as we grow, the caregivers are the ones that protect us, who can go out and run and experience, but we know that can always come back and feel protected. Okay, now you might be wondering what is this has to do with architecture? The fact is, as we grow up, normally, we leave our family, we become a little bit more mature. We are now attached to other symbols. And what are the other symbols? It's what we call culture. Okay. Now, what protects us is our culture. And people that live overseas, they know that very well. And it's not a coincidence that in many countries, the country is called a mother. Okay. So what we did is, in between, we saw a snake, and in between, we saw the image, let's say, of Merlion, which is a cultural symbol. Again, subliminal, is in the background. You never saw that. And indeed, we found out that if we saw the image, a cultural symbol, the stress response will go down. This means that things that happen in the background, let's say when you take a walk, and there is something that familiar in the background, there is this shop house that you see behind me, you might think that they have no effect, but actually they do have an effect. So culture helps us and feel us safe. And if you want more evidence, there are many hospitals that have people that have dementia, and when they demented patients, they get activated and agitated. They put them in a room that is 30, 40 years ago. And this creates some sense of relaxation, protection, and indeed it helps them. Now, some more ideas. I will show you two images. One is called Kiki, and the other is called Bubba. Kiki and Bubba. I want you to not tell me, just think. Which one is Kiki and which one is Bubba? Okay. One is Kiki and the other is Bubba. I'm pretty sure most of you said the left one is Kiki, the right one is Bubba. And this happens if I go down the jungle in Indonesia, it will happen again. So there's still something means that there is the shapes have a sound, right, and have a meaning. So we need to know about that. So recently I was seeing this image, this news. This is in China. Half of these apartments are empty. Well, I don't know the background of the story, but I'm not surprised because they are not Kiki, they are not Bubba. They have no meaning. So we need to have a meaning. Okay. And recently I was at the National Gallery, and the amazing Ting Seok team, she described that very nicely, that in the 70s and the 80s in Singapore, she felt this threat from the sudden urbanization. She thought about this, she talked about it. Sounds like, it looks like we are social climbers. One more principle, and that's already probably obvious, is that things are integrated through different senses, all right? So what you eat depends on the light that is on this, depends on how it smells. Even the sound can make it different. So we should understand that we should integrate different modalities. So a study we did, we found out that if you ask somebody to walk in shadow, trees, or the sun, same distance, okay, they will actually discount it even without thinking. So 100 meters in shadow is 120 under trees, is 160 under sun. So a line is not a line. It depends, again, on context. Another study, we put people in the same room, same temperature, but different light. This is warm light, cool light. The question is, will this affect their thermal comfort? And indeed, in a specific time of the day, the skin temperature will feel like it's 2 degrees Celsius lower under the cool light, which means that we are integrating. Tanya before talked about entrances. And she said that the entrance, the corridor leading to the office, actually affects how the office is perceived. This is another principle in neuroscience or psychology about contextual dependency. It's essentially what I showed you before with the circles, all right? So you see this stimulus, you are thinking, what is this? Well, I can make you believe that it's a bee. I can make you think that it is a 13. So everything depends on the context, and that's what architects do. They create the context. Now, what is more interesting is that you do not need to show the context on the same time. So if I show you this first, and then after 20 minutes I show you this, it will be a 13 in your mind, because I already prepared your brain. So in the same way, the corridor is the context that explains what happens in the office. So what I want to say is that when architects design, they need to also take into account the temporal sequence of events. Finally, some quick notes about light, because, okay, I promised I will talk, then I didn't want to talk, then Andrea said I will talk, so I will talk. So light is quite important because it affects your hormones, and there's specifically a hormone called melatonin, which raises when you're about to sleep, and when you're about to wake up, it will go down. Another hormone called cortisol will go up, and it's supposed to be associated with during the day. You have different activities that you will be able to do. Yeah, so I saw this that if you want to have good sex, you have to do it around 3 o'clock. It's too late now. But actually, it's not. This is not scientifically proven. So you can have sex anytime you want. All right. But there's something amazing. How this happens is that the light goes through the eye, and it affects this very, very small clock. And when we say clock, we really mean a clock, because if I take this and I cut it and I put it on a dish in a room without any connection, every 12 hours, it does what you see on the right. You see, every 12 hours, it will flash and come down, flash and come down. This is a fast forward, right? It's a real clock. And this is affected by the light. But light is not one thing. This is the spectrum of the sunlight. You see how rich it is. And this is the light we get from LED, incandescent, and CFL. Very, very different. Now, there are companies now that try to mimic that. It's not necessary to mimic the full light, I would say. What matters is when we get the light. You don't need to be all the time in the outside, the outdoors, right? It's to try to regulate. Some results that there's some studies that show that blue enriched classroom can increase concentration. And there is a study, a bit controversial, but okay, they saw that students in the US that were exposed to more sunlight displayed higher reading outcomes, higher math outcomes. I know in Singapore, people spend a lot of time, a lot of money for tuition centers, but maybe all you need is some more sunlight, free. So I'm going to finish here. Maybe it was quite fast, but I want to say that reality is always interpreted and depends on context. And we need to understand that things happen in a very short time and are important if they happen all the time. Memories also are important because they generate emotions, and this is what creates attachment. And it's important to understand that humans are multisensory creatures. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
I think you all overran, but it was so captivating, all of the content. You could have continued for another hour and I'd have been happy. It was amazing, actually, all the presentations. The one thing that was most amazing was that we didn't even kind of coordinate this, but all the presentations seemed to be quite seamless and relevant to each other. And I was meant to be taking notes on all the questions, but because the presentation was so captivating, I didn't look at the chat box to see whether there are any questions, which I'll do now. I think one of the interesting things about George's presentation was how complex this whole arena is. And as designers, we will attempt to design spaces which are healthy psychologically, but there's so many stimulants, whether it's cultural, emotional, historical, what happened when you were a child. Any kind of move we try to make is influenced by not just the now, but what's happened in the past and what might happen in the future. So yeah, we have a lot of pressure on us as architects and designers. I'm going to start with one question, which was from one of the early questions on the chat box, which was from Jun Ko. And he talked about, he asked what fractals are, and George did answer it in the chat box, but I think it might be worth exploring that further because I don't know much about fractals. But before I do that, it's just the idea that the complexity in design is the fact that Andrea touched on the idea that to deal with chronic stress, which is the killer, the insidious killer, we have to create a balance in design. So that's both stimulating and calming, or creating points of solitude and points of community. And it's understanding how we can find that balance. And fractals is one of the things I think which can stimulate us. And the chat talks about whether facades should be more stimulating. But maybe I'm going to pass it on to, maybe George can start, and then we pass it on to a few of the other speakers just to talk about the idea of fractals and their power.
Yeah, as I said, fractals, it seems, I think it's something still we're still exploring. My sense has to do with the fact that fractals are in nature. So it might be a kind of familiarity effect, or it makes it look like it's something natural. There's also some research on sound also that suggests that fractal properties could make a sound more pleasant. But very likely, I think it's just another demonstration of a more general principle of first of familiarity. Even biophilia, I think, it has to do with familiarity, and maybe also some kind of attachment and security. So you feel more attached to things that you know. So fractal properties remind us of nature, and they are also familiar, and that's probably why we find them stress relieving, probably. Yeah.
I think I'll chime in here. Can I chime in here?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm probably not, following your sequence. I'll chime in here because I want to follow on to what George is saying. Fractals, in nature, we have what's called the Fibonacci series, where you can actually understand the way that the branches work. There is certain logic. So in nature, we also have amazing, fascinating things like when birds flock, when the fish swim as a group. That's nature's amazing power. I mean, no one created a grasshopper script to get it to work like that, but that's what nature's power is. And then the second point George mentioned is also something that I can relate to, and is absolutely true. The reason why, in my slide, the forest, and you feel more comfortable, the biophilia concept is, it's like coming home. It's the same as when you live abroad for a long time, and then you get back to where your mom is, and it's like, mama, and you're thinking of mama's food, the food, because you've been fed that food, and it's like coming home. You feel safe, you feel secure, you feel like your mom's going to be there to help you. But the reason lies in the reason why it has this effect. It lies in anthropology. Remember the timeline of how long we have been cavemen. So in 50 or 100,000 years time, maybe the concrete buildings will give us that effect. But until 50,000 years later, we now should look at biophilia and get it to help us. And it's hardwired in our computer. We cannot change it. Yeah. So it's super fascinating, and that's what we can learn from neuroscience, from all this understanding.
Thanks, Frven.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Yes, I think there is one study by Richard Taylor suggesting something else to complement what Georgios and Frven said. So he investigated that with eye tracking, that our eye movements, they follow fractal patterns. So, and there are also, like, we have fractals in our body. So maybe one way to see that familiarity is not only because of our evolutionary story, but also because we are nature, and we have fractals in our body, and we work in fractal patterns in some way. I don't know, it's just something to complement. It's also familiarity with our evolution and history, and with our cultural history, yeah. But also maybe we are nature and we are fractals in some way.
Tanya, do you want to add anything, or shall we?
I just think it could be also back related to culture. Like, is it certain pattern, certain color, even is more religion from certain region, or etc. So some people would think that this is very familiar, while some other probably would think that it's exotic and is also attractive in another way. So, yeah.
Yeah, that brings me on to the next question. Thanks for that, Tanya. So I was going to touch upon culture because there was a few questions on culture. So Widari talks about, I'm just going to read this directly, so it might not make any sense when I read it, but the use of a cultural symbol to help us feel safe is so interesting. when we go out into the city today, we are surrounded by new symbols, social distancing symbols. This might be seen as a source of comfort to some and irritation to others. So it kind of goes into that idea that, for example, red could be a scary color for someone in the West, but it's a lucky color in Chinese or Feng Shui culture. So it's how we design. I forget, is it boo boo and zizi? So how do we design everything or find these boo boo zizi things which influence everyone? And it kind of, the thing that disturbed me about all the presentations was it kind of countered a lot of the stuff that we studied in architectural school. So one of them is the idea that with modernism, everything should be similar and efficient and calm, to keep us calm, but then that counters fractals and cultural relevance and richness. And actually, one of the things that disturbed me about George's presentation is the idea that he's pushing nationalism. So we have to go to the mama nationalist ideals for each culture to make everyone feel comfortable, which is kind of postmodernism. It's kind of bringing richness back into the world, which is important. But how we as architects, how we as international architects can design buildings in somewhere like India or Kazakhstan, which is
it's a very delicate balance, and yeah, we don't want to become North Korea. I hope we don't have North Koreans here, but yes, we don't want to have. But yeah, that's where your creativity will come in. All right, but this gives me the opportunity. One complaint I have about offices in Singapore is when you are in an office in Singapore, you don't know, are you in Singapore? Are you in New York? Are you in London? No idea. It's the same, all right? So when we talk with people that design offices here, we tell them, try to make it a little bit more local to have a character. But yeah, it's a delicate balance, I agree.
And it's a new understanding, isn't it? The whole idea of, especially with hotel design, rather than building the same hotel type throughout the world, you bring cultural relevance to wherever you visit, to bring richness to that visit. But there's 2 points of view. There's the McDonald's point of view, where you kind of make the same burger throughout the world. So when you're traveling, you have comfort or familiarity wherever you go. And the other thing is making something different, so you bring richness to wherever you go. And I think you need both. Is the conclusion. The next point I want to touch on is the talk about the corridors. You know, corridors should be nice places to be as opposed to the final destination. Because when, and it was one of the questions, when a long time ago, when I was at architectural school, people like Frank Lloyd Wright were talking about non-spaces being smaller and more constrained. So when you arrive in the main space becomes more wow, because it's very different from the non-space or transition space. But from the presentation today, the idea that the temporal journey being very important, I think is an interesting to talk about how the non-space has to be kind of as nice and as enriching as the destination space. So that's not really quick. There's no real question in that, but I was going to pass it on to you guys to talk further about that.
So just like we mentioned a little bit, I think for this one, one part of us like we worried about when we're actually framing the study is, would it be, some people would just argue, is it your actually your finding would just because the size of a condition, like, is it that your limitation, it cannot be applied to all? But the thing, it also points to another thing is, in a context also always matter, like everyone repeating. It's because maybe it's also back to an office buildings, it is different. For example, when we really need those like wow effect, like for example, theater, or even some of the museum or gallery, it could be different. So let's just say like in the context of maybe in a building like office building, this would be probably more appropriate in terms of a more smooth transition. Or because we also say, because most of the so-called secondary spaces, they've been given less attention and they are not, like they are actually a little bit off. So in that case, it has a negative effect. So that's why we're trying to like level it up to actually bring them a more nice space for people instead of creating something like so less balanced, so-called.
Yeah. And I think, Sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
So corridors, we tend to think them only as transition spaces, but if we consider corridors in workspace, which are long-term occupation spaces, we spend a long time in corridors when we are transitioning. So I have to go to the corridor when I'm going to the toilet, and then when I'm going back, and then when I'm going to the kitchen and going back into the meeting room. So if we look like, if we consider how frequently we go to corridors, we go very often. So they have the potential to affect us more than short-term occupation spaces. And there is one study conducted in corridors in a hospital. I think it was in the US. It was presented in one conference at ANFA. And because they did an installation, a biophilic installation, just with images painted on the walls, this completely changed the performance of doctors and nurses. So this is not a space where they would stay, but because they were like passing by all the time there, this affected stress levels and well-being. So I think corridors are really a forgotten space, but we should consider more, not only because they will affect how we will perceive the main space when we get there, but because on the long term, they can have a huge impact on us.
Yeah.
Which can I chime in next?
Yeah.
Which brings us to a very conflicting dilemma for designers and architects when we deal with our clients, the developers, because of the economic model that they are actually charging their tenants the internal space of each office. So it's natural that the developer or the building owner will want the smallest ever corridor, because so the economic model also has to kind of change so that the end users can appreciate it, and we need to be able to explain. And for example, the spaces could be such that there is a lot more shared space, and the corridors are not circulation. The corridors is a transient space that is from one to another. And based on the quality of the corridor, maybe the developer can even charge for the quality of the space because the tenants are happier and they love their space more, right? So there is something more intrinsic and more fundamental that we also have to address and encourage our clients and developers to go towards.
Thanks, Frven. I'm just scanning the questions. The good thing is George is kind of answering all the questions as they're being thrown in the chat, so he's doing my job for me. There was one question about healthcare, how we can use this knowledge to create healthier buildings. And I suppose it's not just healthier; it can be any building which is healthier. But is there one takeaway that from your knowledge that will help us design healthier buildings, psychologically healthier buildings?
I think creating more opportunities, because since culture is so important, as we just saw here, and we have so many different cultures. So there's no way if I only, let's, I don't know, see here in São Paulo and try to do something that belongs to our culture, because we have people from everywhere here, the same way as we have people from everywhere in Singapore or London or I don't know, so many places. So I think if we create variety, diversity if we consider a more systemic view of our buildings and cities. So if I see it as a system, I will look for balance and I will offer diversity and opportunities. I have the red room for people who like red because of, I don't know, their culture or something, but I can have the blue room or the room full of light, but the dark room for someone who needs a refuge and has problems, is sensitive to light. Or so if we offer more opportunities, we will improve our chances of fulfilling different needs and different memories and cultures and so on.
I think the comments that George penned in the chat flow, which Andrea is mentioning about the red being, is very, very interesting. But it's interesting because not so much that which color is correct. I feel that as designers and architects, the important thing is to know which are the attributes that actually has effect on how we perceive the space, the effect on whether we feel well or not, but actually at the subconscious level. And when we know that, then we can then make decisions and calibrate accordingly, whether we want to give options or for this particular country or this particular type of space, we want to go which color. But to understand that there is a difference is like the first thing we have to accept, just like to understand that, you know, by changing our diet, it will change our shape, to understand that. And fundamentally, one of the things I was trying to explain in my slides was also to understand and to agree that architecture will have an impact on both the physical and the mental well-being, and it will have an impact on the perception of whether you are happy or you're not happy. You know, and we can do something about it.
How would you do that? I suppose the good thing about Andrew's answer was she provided one word which gave everything, with opportunities on the how. So how in one word? This is a really difficult question, but how in one word would you make the building healthier? That's still all three of you, the three remaining speakers. Maybe Frven, we'll give you a break and we'll pass it on to George or Tanya to kind of respond.
So for me, I always think design in context is always important. Context. So, but I do quite agree with Viv here. So basically, if you understand the mechanism, then when you understand the context, then you can make a better call decision. So because if you that's why, just like George said, that why office needs to design the same way in everywhere. But so if you don't design it the same way everywhere, how do you design it in different places? That's also more of a challenging questions. So what we're doing, I think all of us, we're trying to little by little trying to put the so-called the big picture under the big picture, but we also, our works almost a little bit by a little bit to understand a little bit by the big picture. So but yeah, context is important for me.
The good thing about all your answers, it kind of keeps it all in the job, because if our response was everything can be the same, you just get a computer to design it all, but because everything has to be different, we still kind of work, which is good. So then maybe George, you have a quick kind of response?
Well, I think there are some general principles that we need to follow, right? So make people walk, be more social, eat healthier. These are universal. At the bottom of it, I don't believe that humans are substantially different across cultures. So we don't. The mechanism, the way the brain works, is the same, but it is expressed in a different way. So the mechanism is that we need to be attached to something. We need to have memories. But what this memory is, it depends, of course, where you are. Okay. To put another way, in another example, there's a question: what's a beautiful face? All right. One principle that is universal is that the beautiful face is the average face. This is universal everywhere. But of course, the average face depends where you are. Right. So the average face will be beautiful. The average face that is beautiful in Singapore will be very different from the average face that you have experienced if you are in another place, because you have different experiences.
Yeah.
So the mechanisms are the same across cultures. It's just that the way they are expressed.
So your word is kind of attachment or meaning, I suppose, in terms of the one word. Do you know, in terms of beauty is slightly different everywhere? It's true, but the one thing which is common is symmetry. So you know the one thing about beauty which everyone agrees on is if you have a symmetrical face, which I don't, that is beautiful internationally. So maybe we should make symmetrical buildings. But anyway, I'll move back to Frven. Do you want to kind of close?
So my short version of the comment, which isn't a very good answer, so to speak, to a proper teacher would be that healthy buildings are the spaces and that enables people to appreciate and understand that they need to be healthy. So it's not a cheating thing, because when you have a healthy building, the whole point of a healthy building is that the features and the way that it's organized allows people to move. It allows people to feel good because they can interact with others, and it is not a capsule for isolation. And the way that we need to create a healthy building, there is no easy formula, but there could be almost like a checklist that there are certain attributes that we need to address. Yeah, it's about colors, it's about comfort, it's about shadows, it's about social interaction, things like that. But I suppose what I want to advocate is just like when we, the way that we need to learn as a grown-up is different from the way that we need to learn as a child. So if we will reach the level of architects and kind of design with a slightly different philosophy, and knowing that these are the things that, for example, George and Andrea and Tanya have shared, then actually we end up producing better and healthier spaces, which are both generic, but also very unique to each context.
Your word is awareness. Be aware of how a building can affect you. I think. Cool.
Yeah, that can be. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna end it there because George, it's about 3 o'clock here, so we want to be ready for the good time. That was an amazing webinar. That was really I'm shocked how good that was, because I learned so much, and yeah, we should definitely do it again very soon.
Tomorrow,
exactly. Yeah, thank you all for coming, and that was amazing, over multiple countries, from time zones all the way in South America to Asia. So thank you all, and let's do it again.
Sorry, I know it's a job, but I just want to make one last request. I posted in the chat to say your name and where you're from, because that's just simple. I mean, I'm sure it's okay. Even if you don't say your name, you just say where you're from. It would be so interesting for us to be able to say, this webinar, who's how many people are coming from where, because then we get encouraged that it's purposeful. I mean, it's really going somewhere, right?
Yeah, and we had over 60 participants today, so that was amazing, and hopefully you all learned something.
Mostly paid. I mean, paid.
Mostly paid, exactly. Yes.
And yeah, thanks, Kailas. So we've got, I said that I've got 3 books to do. We will look at the trail and try to contact some of you. So the first few people who give me your full details, we will send those 3 books, and it's from the author. So I will get it autographed by a good friend of mine, Matthew, who's the author for this book, which is Freedom to be Happy. He's the chairperson of the Happiness Index based in the UK.
Cool. Thanks, guys. We're going to stop recording now. So
Frven,
enjoy. Oh, sorry. Again.
Do you want to take a good picture, like a big picture for everyone?
Oh, yeah. Why don't we do that? Yeah. Okay,
and
good
then
idea.
could I? Yeah, Chris Teamwood will help us. And then if you show your face, I mean, the briefest moment, then we can and we have a lot of faces, right? That's going to be really cool, Whoever's available and you don't mind showing your face, you could. And Tim, would you orchestrate and drive this?
Yes, everyone ready? Go for it now. Yep, very good. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Very grateful that you guys stayed till the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.